A brief note before we begin. This video discusses real events from history that some viewers may find distressing. There are no graphic images here. Our goal is not to shock, but to understand. Because nearly every protection you have as a patient today exists because of what you are about to learn. For most of human history, there were no rules. No rule that a doctor had to ask your permission. No rule that a scientist had to tell you the truth. No rule that a person could not be used as a test subject without ever knowing. These are the experiments that proved why those rules were needed, and these are the people who paid the price for them. Our story begins in the aftermath of the Second World War. During the war, doctors in Nazi Germany carried out experiments on prisoners. These people did not volunteer. They were never asked. The experiments were performed on them against their will. We will not describe what was done. It is enough to know that many did not survive it. When the war ended, the world saw the records, and it demanded an answer. In 1947, a court in the German city of Nuremberg put a group of these doctors on trial. It became known as the Doctors Trial, and out of that trial came something that had never existed before: a written code of medical ethics. It was called the Nuremberg Code. Its very first principle was simple. The voluntary consent of the human subject is essential. For the first time, it was written down that no one may be experimented on without their agreement. It seems obvious now. It was not obvious then. It had to be paid for. At the same time, on the other side of the world, something similar had happened. During the war, a secret unit of the Japanese army ran a program of human experimentation on prisoners. It was known mainly by a number, Unit 731. The people held there were treated as test subjects. Again, we will not describe the details. What matters is what happened afterward, because when the war ended, much of it was hidden. Some of those responsible were never put on trial, in exchange for the data they had gathered. A number of them were quietly given immunity. The victims received no such justice. For decades, the program was barely spoken of. It is a reminder that exposure does not always bring accountability, and that silence can be its own kind of harm. These wartime atrocities shocked the world. Surely people believed nothing like this could happen in peacetime, in a free country, in an ordinary hospital. They were wrong. In the United States, beginning in 1932, a study began in Macon County, Alabama. It involved hundreds of poor black men who had syphilis, a serious illness, but one that could be observed over many years. The men were told they were being treated. They were not. The researchers wanted to watch the disease as it progressed, so they simply watched and said nothing. Here is the part that is hardest to accept. In the 1940s, penicillin became the standard cure for syphilis, a simple, effective treatment. The men in the study were not given it. The study continued, not for 1 year or 10. It ran for 40 years. It did not end because someone in charge decided to stop it. It ended in 1972 because a whistleblower went to the press. The public was horrified, and this time, the horror led to change. In 1974, the United States passed the National Research Act. It required independent ethical review of experiments on people. A few years later came the Belmont Report, which set out the basic principles of research ethics: respect for persons, doing no harm, fairness. The modern system of informed consent grew directly out of what was done to those men. But the same era held another secret. In the 1940s, some of the same American researchers traveled to Guatemala. There, with far less oversight, they deliberately exposed people to disease, soldiers, prisoners, and patients, without their understanding and without their consent. This was not discovered at the time. It stayed buried in the records for decades. It was not until 2010 that a historian uncovered what had been done. The United States issued a formal apology, but by then, those involved were long gone. An apology cannot reach the dead. In the 1950s, the Cold War created a new kind of fear, a fear of mind control. The American intelligence agency the CIA launched a secret program to study it. Its code name was MKUltra. Researchers tested drugs and other methods on people to see whether a human mind could be controlled. Some of the subjects were volunteers. Many were not. In some cases, people were given substances without their knowledge. Ordinary citizens, unaware they were part of an experiment. When the program was shut down, most of its records were deliberately destroyed. The full truth may never be known. What we do know came out in the 1970s, when government investigations forced it into the light. Some of the most troubling cases involved those least able to protect themselves. At an institution called Willowbrook, researchers studied hepatitis, a disease of the liver. The subjects were children living at the institution. To study how the disease spread, children were deliberately exposed to it. Parents were asked to agree. But for many, agreeing was the only way to get their child admitted. That is not a real choice. The case became a turning point in how we think about consent and about experimenting on people who cannot freely say no. Around the same time, another secret was unfolding. During the Cold War, the United States studied the effects of radiation. To do so, some researchers exposed people to it, patients and others, often without telling them what was happening. They did not know they were being studied. These programs stayed hidden for decades. In the 1990s, the government finally investigated and admitted what had been done. Once again, the apology arrived far too late. Not every troubling experiment caused physical harm. Some caused harm of a different kind. In the 1960s, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram wanted to know how far ordinary people would go when an authority figure told them to. His volunteers believed they were hurting a stranger. They were not. It was staged. But the volunteers did not know that, and many left deeply shaken by what they thought they had done. A later study, the Stanford Prison Experiment, divided volunteers into guards and prisoners. It was meant to last 2 weeks. It was stopped after 6 days. For years, it was taught as proof of how easily people turn cruel. More recently, researchers have questioned how it was run and how much it really proved. But both studies raise the same urgent question. What do we owe the people who take part in our experiments? Out of all of this, slowly, the rules were built. Today, an experiment on human beings must be reviewed by an ethics board before it can begin. People must be told what will happen to them. They must agree freely, and they can stop at any time. This is called informed consent. It is not just a piece of paperwork. It is the line that every one of these stories crossed. Every signature on that consent form stands for someone who was never asked. We tell these stories not to frighten anyone, but because the people who were harmed were real. They had no choice, and for a long time, no voice. Remembering what happened to them is how we make sure it does not happen again. Because the most important result of these experiments was not any discovery. It was a simple, hard-won rule that no person should ever be treated as merely a means to an end. If you found this video worth your time, consider subscribing for more history like this, and take a moment to remember the people behind these stories.